You've read a lot about Murray. You probably have read a lot about some of the things that he has done for the movement, some of the things that he has always been so excellent at, keeping us online. He is radical, he's charming, and he is warm. And also, he and I can see eye to eye, so we don't have to adjust the microphone. Murray is a special friend, regardless of the optical illusion. And I think that after you have the opportunity to visit with him tonight, and I'd like the environment to be like that you too will come to care for him as much as many of us do. The format for tonight, since we couldn't really put you around on cushions and move the tables and have a fireplace and a little wine and all, is that basically Murray's going to talk to you for a while, just for a while, and then we have some floor mics set up, and you're going to have the opportunity to talk to him. And Murray always responds. This is one of those special historical events as part of our 10th anniversary convention that doesn't really have anything to do with a lot of the politics that we might get involved with over the course of the next few days, or some of the things that you might have read. This is for you, getting to know Murray, and for Murray to hear what you're thinking about. I guess the very first thing that I ever read by Murray was For a New Liberty, and it's been said that that book alone probably has converted more people to libertarian philosophy than any other piece of literature. But Murray, of course, never stopped with that. He is probably the most prolific writer of any of us in the movement, and is published in just about every journal, small magazine, some people call them rags, as well as having his own volumes. There isn't much more that I can tell you about him, since you know so much. It's with a great deal of pleasure that I share with you tonight one of my best friends, Murray Rothbard.
Thank you. Victory. Thank you very much, ML, for a lovely, lovely introduction. And this is really a nostalgia city here for me tonight, in keeping with the occasion, being an LP10 convention. And so what I'm going to do is go back and talk about the old days. And whatever prominence I have in the libertarian movement is probably mostly due to the fact that I've been around longer than anybody else, so that I can talk about the old days and be, give new information. Two things, two landmarks for me sort of struck me is that the movement has really grown tremendously in the last 20 years or so, actually more than that. Two sort of landmarks that stick in my mind. One is that when I was sitting around my living room with my eight associates and colleagues, which I thought was the whole movement. I'm not saying it was the whole movement, I just didn't know about anybody else. I'm sure there are other living rooms around all over the place, I just never heard of them. And we used to joke around a lot about what future historians would write about us. And of course, it was just considered a big yuck, because 8 crackpots sitting around in the living room talking about wild ideas. That was sort of like an inside academic joke. But what happened about, I guess 6 or 7 years ago, a friend of mine who's a professional historian started attacking me. Why didn't I keep all this precious memorabilia from the old days, the early history of the movement? And I realized, by God, future historians are now interested. So that was one landmark. Second landmark for me was that, considering again that we started off with 2 or 3 people and then escalated to 8 the was the first time about 10 years ago when I was attacked by another budding libertarian for not being a pure Rothbardian. That was that was a real shockaroo. And after I got over the first shock, I realized, well, this is great. The movement's really advanced, but I could be attacked for not being a pure Rothbardian. The first thing, in the old days, we used to ask people, when we found another libertarian, which was a very rare occasion, like one a year, the first thing we'd ask him or her was, well, how did you get started? How did you become a libertarian? Because it was obviously a rare event. I'm not sure whether you people ask each other that these days or not, but I'm looking forward to the great day in the future. I figure now in the transition period. And someday, not too distant future, it'll just be a matter of course everybody's a libertarian. You're trying to figure out, why is this person not a libertarian? So, however, in the old days, that was the big question. How'd you get here? And so, what I'm going to do tonight is sort of take you back at how I got started, which is a major area of my own expertise. First place, I started off, I think, my first libertarian instincts or expressions or whatever came about when I was a little tyke. I first entered the public school system as a young lad and hated the guts of it, okay? That was the first experience. I hated everybody. I hated the teachers, I hated the administrators, I hated my fellow colleagues. So I made an enormous amount of trouble for my parents. They finally yanked me out, put me into a private school, which I loved. And then, flourished. And so my teeny mind immediately made a connection. Public school, bad. Private school, good. I did not, of course, articulate that into a full system at that point. Then I was growing up. You have to think back now. This is really an act of imagination, historical imagination, to recall what growing up, or to realize what growing up in New York in the 1930s was like, 1930s and 40s. As a young middle-class Jewish lad, everybody I knew, this is literally everybody, friends, relatives, acquaintances, whatever, was either a Communist Party member or else was thinking about whether they should join it. Do I have the spirit enough? Do I have the spunk to join the CP? That was the range of discussion. Either you were a party member, or you were puzzling about whether or not you had the guts to join it. In that atmosphere, I guess my father was the first libertarian I knew, because he was strongly opposed to all this, and so then the spirit, I just, as I kept shocking them at parties or relatives. I had, I think, four aunts and uncles who were Communist Party members, and another, 2 or 3 or 4 who were pondering whether or not to join. So I got more and more obnoxious to these people as I kept going, attacking them and saying this is all nonsense, so forth and so on. That was my first experience in political action in my poor beleaguered family. Actually, my father, as I say, my father was really my inspiration for this thing, so we got along very well. And I just an immediate nuclear family, just the rest of the people, it was a problem. Then in the swanky private school in which I was enrolled, where everybody except, well, it was a very peculiar setup, which I don't go into great detail, but in New York City, the rich, in those days at least, rich people would send their sons, to Deerfield Academy or whatever, out of town, the prep school, and the daughters being specially protected were sent to New York City schools. As a result, since this particular school tried to be coeducational, there were very few boys who would show up. In other words, there was a big boy shortage. And so, in order to get boys to attend the school and make it really coeducational, they gave a lot of scholarships to poor and middle-class young lads, including myself. So at any rate, we had a spectacle of all these wealthy, extreme liberal types, and who would be taken back and forth to school in Rolls-Royce limousines, who were extreme New Dealers or Communist Party types or whatever. And I would trudge, back and forth to his crummy apartment, increasingly individualistic and pro-capitalist. At any rate, as I kept dealing with these people, I got more and more pure. I was particularly interested in economics. And I remember in the 8th grade, I was arguing against the capital gains tax, which Roosevelt was introducing at the time. I don't remember my arguments. I don't know if they're sound or not, but anyway, I was arguing against it. Then it's true, rumors have had it, and it's true that my parents both met at an anarchist dance. This is in 1920 or something like that. They have to realize the culture of that period, and there were a lot of anarchist dances and balls and things like that. It's true they met there. And I remember my father's library was one of the first books I remember reading was Elsbacher's book on anarchism, which was a very exotic book, which I thought was very interesting. I was not yet converted, you understand. I was only 10 or something. At any rate, but this is not, they were not, well, I guess what happened was my father was an anarchist for a couple of years. Then World War I arrived, and he found out all his friends were being arrested, which they were, in opposition to the war. He decided it was healthier to drop out of political activity and become a pure chemist, which he did. He was the first retreatist in our movement. He felt retreatism was better than martyrdom at that point. At any rate, he sort of lost interest in politics, and then what happened was in the recession of 1938, when after following Keynesian policies, we had a big collapse. He decided that Keynesianism or New Deal was wrong and so forth, and became economically conservative. And so I followed right in there in that spirit. Anyway, getting to then, I guess what happened, my next brush with the state apparatus came in high school, when just as I was getting interested in the whole subject, purely for sociological reasons, you understand, Miguel LaGuardia, who was an extremely beloved figure at the time, among all the left liberal establishment, Miguel LaGuardia immediately closed down the burlesque houses. And I figured it was a personal blow, a personal affront. So it was my first interest in civil liberties. You learn from experience. So when I got to Columbia University, I found out that on the campus at the time, there were, first of all, you have to literally realize, literally true, on the entire campus, there were a whole bunch of communists and communist fellow travelers, a whole bunch of social democrats, and 2 Republicans. The other Republican, I was one Republican, the other Republican was an English major. We didn't have very much in common at the time. I wasn't really interested in literature. So that was it. And after continuing brushes at Columbia, I got more and more conservative, okay, and more free market oriented. An atmosphere which was extremely, in those days, hostile to the free market. However, so here's a situation. I thought I was the only free market person in the world at that point. And there weren't too many evidences, to disprove me. So when I got to graduate school, which is, I guess, 1946, and 45, 46, all of a sudden there appeared this fantastic phenomenon. I have to realize, again, there's a huge number of people coming back from the Army. The graduate school was flooded, probably the peak number of students in all of history. 500 people in the graduate economics class, things like that. Never to be seen either before or since. And all of them were, the big argument at the time was, well, should you join the CP? Should you be a pro-Henry Wallace or pro-Harry Truman or whatever? And in that spirit, George Stigler, distinguished Friedmanite economist, arrived at Columbia University campus. His first 2, I remember this very vividly, his first 2 lectures, one was on the evils of rent control, and the second was on the evils of minimum wage, at which point almost hysteria breaks out. He was almost lynched. This is unheard of. You have to realize that you have to try to have an active imagination to realize this is unheard of. For anybody with an economist, you could think, well, maybe the Hearst Press might say it, but certainly nobody of academic pretensions. So I wrote away for a pamphlet, an anti-rent control pamphlet, which Stigler had mentioned, and thereby discovered the movement. So my first experience with the movement. Before that, it was just me, my father, and that was it, as far as I knew. Okay, 2-man movement. Then I discovered the Foundation for Economic Education, which in those days was the movement, and that was it. So it was a tremendous thing for me. It was like, that was the open sesame. I realized, other people around. There weren't just one person, okay? And I think they did there was a tremendous achievement on their part. They had, that was it. It was the movement. people who would say the same sort of things and be interesting, and recommend readings. Because I never read any of this stuff. You see, it was all sort of, I don't know, sort of evolved, and there were no real readings on the topic except John Stuart Mill. I mean, nobody since, say, 1848, as far as I knew. And so with FEE, which had seminars and cocktail parties and drew people together and so forth, I discovered the movement, and there are marvelous, particularly marvelous, two marvelous people, which I want to pay tribute to, Frank Chodorov and Baldy Harper. Frank Chodorov was a fantastic person. He was a unbuttoned type in a three-button world, and scattering ashes everywhere and so forth and so on. It was just magnificent. And he also was very interested in discussing ideas. Many of the other people of these cocktail parties were really not. They were more agriculture-oriented. I have nothing against agriculture. I love agriculture. But many of their conversations were confined to things like agricultural metaphors, like the seed corn and butterflies. I know nothing about either seed corn or butterflies. I've felt a little bit out of it. Chodorov, being an urban type, was not interested in seed corn. At any rate, he was a great individualist. I recommend there's just a new book of his essays, collected essays, just come out, called Fugitive Essays. And it was my first real experience in radical individualism. He was, I remember it was a real shock for me. I arrived at the Columbia University bookstore one afternoon. I see a headline, and remember the pamphlets, and try to remember this, the atmosphere of the time was all socialist, okay, to a man. And I see this pamphlet, the headline, big bold red letters saying, "Don't buy bonds." Another one saying, "Taxation is robbery." That was a real shockaroo for me. Taxation, by God, it is robbery. And that was my first education in political theory. So Chodorov had a great little magazine, broadsheet called Analysis, which he kept going, I guess, on his own meager funds, a very small circulation. And he has magnificent radical stuff. First of all, he was also a great writer, marvelously clear, lucid writer. And so under the auspices of reading both Chodorov and the stuff that he recommended, like Albert J. Nock, another magnificent political philosopher and a great writer, whom I hope you discover if you don't know about him yet, a marvelous book called Our Enemy, the State, another great book called Memoirs of a Superfluous Man, and H.L. Mencken is my favorite writer as a qua writer. So it took a very short period of time I became a pure libertarian. In other words, before that I was sort of moving in that direction. I was a sort of Chamber of Commerce type or something like that. In a very short period of time I became a pure minarchist. I mean, all out, radical. And, in favor of repudiating the debt and everything else. I still was a minarchist. I still believe that point that the government, there should be a government, but strictly confined to these police and courts, and that was it. The third person, of course, I want to pay tribute to is another person I met through the Foundation for Economic Education, namely my great mentor, Ludwig von Mises, whom this year is... this year is a centennial. And so, it's a really amazing thing considering Mises died very few years ago. He died almost about the same time as the centennial is coming up. And I met him through FEE. I heard that he was giving lectures at New York University. At that point, I didn't know he was still alive because he wasn't mentioned in economics courses, either undergraduate or graduate, except as somebody who had tried to show that socialism couldn't work, and that had been refuted 30 years before, and therefore that was it. So, and they told me at FEE that he was coming out with a book that fall, big new book. I said, "Oh, what's interesting? What's it about?" And they said, "Everything." That, of course, was human action. And, of course, they were right. So I started taking Mises seminars in the fall of 1949, which is the second year he was giving it. And 2 months later or so, Human Action came out. And so the combination had a synergistic effect. To me, it was a real conversion experience, Human Action. I read the thing, I think, you have to realize I'd gone through all the graduate economics courses, right? And I was unhappy with all of them. I felt somehow there was something missing somewhere in the picture. I was a free market person, but I didn't have the economic theory background. I realized that these things didn't work. I was politically in favor of it, but I didn't really have a satisfactory economic theory to support this. And I felt that the Keynesians were right when they attacked the institutionalists were right when they attacked the Keynesians, but I didn't see any real positive way out. And so when I read Human Action, I'd say it was a real conversion experience. I read it very fast, and it was really like reading a new Bible. That was it. And so it was a tremendous experience. And at that point, I became an Austrian and a Misesian. And providing us with a satisfactory economic theory, solving all the problems, such as what about monopoly, or what about business cycles, and what about this, that, and the other thing, and providing a firm foundation and analysis of human action itself. Mises himself, another person to pay tribute to personally, just a magnificent person. Before we met Mises, me and other people who were disciples or potential disciples, we were quaking in our boots. I know one friend of mine, it was just a kid then, he was still in high school. He was still a great libertarian. And he wanted to meet Mises in the worst way. He couldn't think of a way to do it. So he shows up at Mises' door, rings the doorbell, and Mises opens the door, says yes, and he says, I'm selling subscriptions to the Freeman. Now, this, of course, is a big joke because Freeman has no subscriptions. I mean, you write away for it and you get it free, but he didn't know what else to say. And he hoped this would start a conversational gambit, when Mises would say, well, that's it, why are you interested in the Freeman or something? Mises said, I already have it, and slams the door. Anyway, and the thing about Mises is, one of the reasons why everybody's afraid to meet him is he's fiercely polemical, of course, in his writings, attacking all of his enemies bitterly with no compromise, attacking them as babblers, et cetera, et cetera. In person, however, is just the opposite. Just charming, wonderful person, courteous, bringing back to us the last days of pre-World War I Vienna. Always trying to bring out the best productivity in his students. And the students many of them were very dumb. Many of them were packaging majors. He was unfortunately. He was unfortunately teaching, and this I will never forgive academia for. The only job he could really find was a job in a business school where most people were accounting majors or packaging majors, things like that. Had no interest whatsoever in what Mises was talking about, just an easy A for them. Mises didn't know anything about the American grading system. In Europe they don't grade A, B, C, so you used to give everybody A's automatically. And they told him, you can't do that, professor, you can't. Oh, it's okay, he'll give automatic A's and B's, go down the list and alternate. So since he was an easy marker, he had a lot of fillers in this little class, and yet he would try to think of research project. Yes, you should do such and such, and have a book on this and an article on this. It was kind of, in a sense, pathetic, but he didn't seem to realize it. He just sailed ahead, uncomplaining, never complained about this situation, and unfailingly cheerful, unfailingly telling marvelous anecdotes about the old days in Vienna, magnificent anecdotes, and generally being extremely lovable as well as being brilliant. The one anecdote which those of you who are interested in philosophy will particularly appreciate. He was walking down the street with Max Scheler one day. It was in the 1920s. Max Scheler was a distinguished German philosopher, very much opposed, as Mises was, to logical positivism, which in those days was flourishing in Vienna. Vienna was the home of logical positivism. They're walking down the street in Vienna. You always walk, of course. It's a great place to walk in. He's walking down the street with Mises, and he says, "Tell me, Lou, what is there in the climate of Vienna that creates so many logical positivists?" Mises shrugs his shoulders in typical Misesian gesture. He says, "Well, after all, Max, in Vienna there are now 3 million people. There are only 12 logical positivists. So it can't be the climate." Another, of course, great thing we should always say to very hesitant students who would be afraid to speak up. They figure he knows everything and they know nothing. He said, don't hesitate to say anything, he said, because whatever you say, regardless of how idiotic it is, has already been said before by some eminent economist. So that was that was my introduction as a Misesian. We had, in Mises seminar, I met people who are still my very close friends, who were my so-called living room that begins in this period. Before that, there was no living room, just me and my father, and I got married, and that was it. Me and my wife, I guess. That was the living room. And then we had, I found these people who were high school students, or just beginning college, who were Misesians, and we had these living room sessions. And we call ourselves the Circle Bastia, after, of course, Frederick Bastiat. And we had about, I don't know how many people, maybe 5 hardcore people and 6 or 7 fringe people. And that was it. And we'd sit around discussing abstract libertarian questions, which we now, of course, are very familiar with, such as, which in those days nobody ever talked about, I mean, because that was it. We were the only libertarians I knew about. At least the only ones interested in these abstruse topics, like if somebody throws a gorilla into a plate glass window, who's liable for the window? Is it the guy who throws the gorilla? Is it the owner of the gorilla, or is it the gorilla himself? These sort of burning questions are constantly on our minds. In those days, of course, we didn't argue about strategy. Even people as sort of flighty as we were, to start discussing strategy with 8 people, you know, how are we going to win? Would have been considered too bizarre even for us. So now, about the same winter of 1949-50, this is, I guess, 2 or 3 months later, after my conversion to Austrianism, I became an anarchist, and I can remember exactly what happened. It was pure logic that did it. I used to argue with 2 or 3 very close friends of mine who were liberals, who were very intelligent. We'd have sessions sitting around arguing constantly, right? And we had a similar session in my house. I remember that very, very vividly. And we had usual arguments. About 3 in the morning they leave, because as many of you know, I'm a night person. And 3 in the morning sort of just about average for breaking up an evening. And I thought to myself, you know, I think something important happened tonight. What the hell was it? And it wasn't just like the usual argument. And I thought the thing over. I realized what it was, because one of them said at one point, because I was in favor of laissez-faire. I was a pure minarchist, laissez-faire minarchist, okay. And they, of course, were regular liberals. And they said, look, why do you favor government supply police force and courts? What's your justification for that? And I said something like, well, the people get together and they decide that you can have this monopoly court system and monopoly police. And they said, I think very intelligently now, they said, well, if the people can get together and say that, why can't the people get together and set up a steel plant and a dam and all the rest of it, right? Why can't they set up all sorts of other government industries? I thought to myself, I said, by God, they're right. I came to the conclusion that laissez-faire was inconsistent. That either you had to go over to anarchism and scrap government altogether, monopoly government, coercive government altogether, or else you have to become a liberal. Of course, since it was out of the question for me to become a liberal, that was it. That was my conversion. Then I started reading up on this stuff, anarchist writings and libertarian writings, et cetera, and broadened my perspective. But that was the essential. That was a tremendous winter for me. It was a winter of a double-barrel conversion. First to Austrian economics and second to anarchism. I remember, let's see, yeah, then there's also in Columbia Graduate School, where I still was located. Of course, I used to have arguments with these people all the time. At one point, interesting thing happened, which stunned my liberal associates. They said, look, here you are, an extreme right-winger, which I was considered at the time, extreme right-wing crazy, anarchist or whatever, and we'll we got to meet you up with Whitey. Whitey was the Communist Party leader on the campus. He was sort of a thuggish type, with turtleneck sweaters, 6'8" or whatever. I mean, in that stratosphere, who knows what the height is? A menacing-looking figure in general. So we got to get you together with Whitey. So they introduced me they set up a meeting on the street on Broadway. And they figured they could get out fast, you see. And they introduced me formally. It was kind of sweet. They said, we introduce Moran Rothbard, here's what it was. Whitey, whatever his name was, who was the outstanding Marxist-Leninist on campus. And here's Murray Rothbard, who was attacking Senator Taft for having sold out to the socialists. And then they figured that would be it. Then we, pummel each other to death, and they get rid of two extremists. And oddly enough, what happened was that Whitey said, "Oh, an anarchist, that's great." And so we shook hands. We had a very friendly discussion in which Whitey tried to prove to me that the way to achieve the withering away of the state is by maximizing state power. And I thought that was a little kooky. So, my liberal friends were totally confused. Why are these people conversing even? Why aren't they hitting each other over the head with clubs? And so that was one interesting ideological experience. Another interesting political point was when was this? Yeah, about this time. I had not, of course, the Libertarian Party had not yet existed, so I was not yet politically pure in the sense of politically, organizationally pure. And the 1948 campaign, I supported Thurman for president. Thurman was the states' rights candidate. Okay, there was a little club on Columbia University campus called Students for Thurman. It was a very small club, as you might expect. And this was during the height of political action. Most of the people there on campus were Henry Wallace supporters. Others were Truman supporters, and 2 or 3 Dewey supporters. And here I was, a Thurman supporter. So the Students for Thurman, I remember, had one meeting. And the meeting, there were 4 or 5 members and about 12 or 13 hostile observers trying to find out what kind of evil racism is going to be promoted here. And most of the people who got up and spoke were sort of, Southern states' rights types. Didn't have much to say. And I got up. Here's a New York Jewish lad. I guess I was on a passion plea against centralized government for decentralization. I couldn't understand this at all. Anyway, the Students for Thurman Club did not flourish. That was my one experience with it. At any rate, we had, as I say, about 6 or 7 people or something in this little circle Bastia. We got along very well. I think it was very happy times. Small in number, but pure in spirit. And arguing, as I say, about arcane matters, and never about strategy. I remember also then about this time, was the first time in my life I ever got red baited. It's a big new experience for me. I mean, now those of you who think I'm a commie now, it's nothing to it, but I consider myself an extreme right-winger. Okay, this is the old right. The Republicans or the right-wingers were semi-libertarian in those days. They were anti-military intervention, they were anti-conscription, they were in favor of the free market. And so I consider myself sort of extreme version of this. Okay, so I wrote a column for an obscure little magazine called Faith and Freedom, which nobody's ever heard of, I'm sure, here, and was written. It was a very good, actually very good libertarian magazine for its day. It was written for right-wing Protestant ministers. That was the market that they were writing for. The people were writing it. It was a sort of a culture clash, and so I wrote the Washington column. I succeeded Chodorov. One of my proud moments is when Chodorov left Washington column. I became the Washington columnist, even though I'd never been to Washington at that point. And I wrote it under a pseudonym called Aubrey Herbert, and for various obscure reasons, which I need not go into, unimportant reasons. At any rate, this was the beginning of the Eisenhower administration. So I had a lot of fun attacking all sorts of statist plans of the Eisenhower administration, attacking the idea that we should spend every American drop of American blood supporting Chiang Kai-shek, things like that. I was having a ball. And the editor comes flying to the East. Before that, 6 months before, he said I was doing a great job, great writer, and all that. He comes to the East and he said, I have to fire you. I said, why do you have to fire me? I thought you liked, that's not the point. He said, our constituents are writing letters calling you a communist. These are the right-wing Protestant ministers. So I was kind of stunned. It's the first time I've ever been red baited. I'm now, of course, used to it. It made much difference. But it was a culture shock. So at any rate, I said, but since I spent all the time attacking the government, how can I be a communist? Since communists are in favor of all-out government ownership of everything. But logic was lost on the editor because he was just interested in his constituents. Fortunately or unfortunately, divine retribution struck, and the magazine folded about 3 months later. Well, I guess let's see, this brings me up to about middle or late 1950s. let's see, I guess I should, well, okay, the late 50s, as I say, before that, it was essentially those of us who were libertarians, and again, I guess it was about 5 or 6 or 8 or whatever, considered ourselves extreme right-wingers in this spectrum context. Then what happened was the right wing was taken over and changed dramatically by National Review, 1955. And for various reasons, one because there was a power vacuum, because the old leaders had died off, like Taft and Colonel McCormick. It was easy for the National Review to take over and sort of change the whole picture into what the right wing is now. The right wing in those days was not theocratic, it was not pro-war, pro-conscription. So anyway, the face of the whole right wing was changed, at which point those of us who had considered ourselves extreme right-wingers had to start leaving the movement, leaving the right-wing movement. And it was a painful break, as these things usually are. I wrote quite a few economic articles and book reviews for National Review the first few years. I was pretty appalled by those days with the new right, and split with them about 1959 or something, about that period. My best friend there was Frank Meyer. He was a very interesting character. He was the book review editor and general theoretician for National Review, now dead. Another very, very charming chap. He was extremely erudite, intellectually exciting, libertarian in many ways. He was great on the public school system, hated the guts of the public school system, even hated private schools. And as a result, he raised his kids himself, which is a heroic act, as probably many of you would realize. And he's pretty good on most things. Unfortunately, he was weak on one particular topic, namely nuclear war. He was all in favor of it. To give you sort of a feel of what National Review was in those days, it probably still is, but I haven't had any contact with him in a long time. Frank and his wife Elsie were also a very charming person. The two of them used to argue bitterly about what the foreign policy move should be. Okay? Frank was in favor of immediate nuclear attack on the Soviet Union. Okay? Elsie wanted to give them 24 hours to resign before we attacked them. That was the matrix of the spectrum of opinion on the right wing, on the new right. So we did not politically see eye to eye, obviously, for after the first few years when I found out what was going on. The other thing that struck me about the new right was the monarchistic aspect. Remember many sessions or cocktail parties, and the big argument would be something like this: should the Bourbon monarchy be restored first, or the Habsburgs? So, that's the sort of thing I could relate very well to. It was even worse than agricultural metaphors. So what happened was, after the small growth in the 40s, in other words, after finding the movement in the middle of late 40s, and then sort of having some intellectual companions, whatever, in the late 50s, we're back in square one again, more or less, by 1959 or 60. Also, libertarians in that period were swinging in a pro-war direction, also, whoever they were, mostly was swinging in a pro-war direction. One of my close friends, who was an original member of the Circle Bastia, Robert Schuckman, who died a tragic death very early, was the first chairman of the Young Americans for Freedom. To give you an example of YAF's spirit in those days, it probably still is. The founding meeting in Sharon, Connecticut of YAF, okay, there was a small libertarian contingent. This was the beginning of the Libertarian Conservative Alliance. Not me, but the other people. And they suggested the term Young Americans for Freedom. The trads, who were really the majority, traditionalists, said, no, we can't use the word freedom because it's a commie word. To me, it sort of symbolizes the right wing from then on. Freedom is a commie word. Okay. But Schuckman was able to prevail, I guess, with some of the cooler heads like Buckley and get the thing started. So we had a situation that by the early 60s, I had to start battling on the foreign policy front, both with libertarians as well as other people. And there was, when the Vietnam War started, and the draft, of course, this made the thing much more intense, the whole problem. And Leonard Liggio and myself founded Left and Right, which I guess 3 times a year publication, I don't even know how to say it, triannual, whatever. And we figured nobody was reading it. I mean, we had some subscribers. Unfortunately, we were so ill-organized that we never cashed anybody's check. So, at any rate, as a result, we had a heavy deficit, you can imagine. But we figured nobody was reading it. It turned out later, after the magazine died, a lot of people seemed to have been influenced by it. But that's the sort of thing that happens in writing. Writing is sort of like putting a note on a bottle and putting it out in the ocean, hoping somebody reads it someday. So I'll be very surprised if you find out a lot of people have read it. This position of being anti-war and anti-draft, certainly on the war question, a position which split us totally from the right-wingers, who then again accused us of being commies for the second and not the last time. We really arrive at the famous YAF split. In other words, we get to the point in '69, I guess it was. All of a sudden, libertarian types pop up at YAF, and you will hear, I'm sure, at the SIL party, more discussion of this. And I wasn't really close to that because the YAF split happened in St. Louis, where I wasn't apt. I did contribute to the split by writing an inflammatory 4-page article in Libertarian Forum, which I just founded in '69 to replace left and right, saying, listen, YAF, urging them all, calling upon the split with this evil organization. Apparently has, once again, blowing my cool, but seemed to have a certain amount of effect. At any rate, apparently YAF was split, of course. So the big issue being the draft, the conservatives or the trads at the YAF convention being horrified and appalled when one of our people, one of the Libertarian Caucus people in YAF, burned his draft card openly, at which point they try to lynch him. And another thing is our people at St. Louis were shouting laissez-faire as while they were burning the draft card, and the opposition, the trads, were shouting lazy fairies, and which you can, again, shows the mentality of these people. So, with the meantime, in the Libertarian Forum had been founded, one, because left and right was running too many deficits, and two, because we figured that with the Nixon administration coming to power, and this has certain parallels right now, of course, many libertarians at the time thought that Nixon was going to be the savior. He was going to bring liberty to America. I swear it's true. Several friends of mine who have by this time become Nixon advisors were claiming Nixon is really a libertarian. As a matter of fact, some of them said Nixon was really an anarchist. I get that. They said, Nixon's one of us. You'll see. Right now, of course, because he's a politician, he's running for office, he has to pretend he's left-wing and statist and all that. But you'll see, boy, when he gets into office, you'll see what he'll be. He'll take off the gloves, come out of the closet. Of course, we did see, to our deep regret. But as a matter of fact, I coined a little quip at that point. Nixon was one of the pioneers in the idea of having special interest groups for Nixon, like writers for Nixon, housewives for Nixon, et cetera, et cetera. So I wrote a thing saying there should be a group called Anarchists for Nixon. At any rate, there was, I guess, quick disillusionment with that. But we founded the Libertarian Forum largely because my publisher and close friend Joe Peden believed that we should have a voice pouring out of the public, whoever reads it among the libertarian public, pointing out that Nixon is not really a libertarian, goddammit. And that's really how it got started. While about the same time the YAF split was going on, we started supper clubs in New York, Libertarian Supper Club. There is now a Libertarian Supper Club, which is very successful and peaceful. Our supper club was successful, but not very peaceful. This was during the Nixon repression period. Okay, so we figured out that the meetings in my living room were getting a little too large. I have a pretty small living room. The living room is legendary, but it's small. Okay, so we decided, why don't we have a supper club? We hire a Chinese restaurant or something nice and cheap, and have a meeting and just announce it and have somebody reading a paper, whatever, some short thing, having a discussion. So we did that. We met at a Chinese restaurant, a seedy but very good Chinese restaurant on Broadway and 100th Street, 103rd Street, something like that. And we thought we'd get about 30 people, right? We got about 80. This is the beginning of the sort of big libertarian growth. Where did these 80 people come from? Who the hell are they? Well, some of them, unfortunately, were police agents, at least one. Because what happened was that you have to realize these meetings were extremely innocuous, right? I mean, my friend Leonard Ludwig gave a paper on the history of classical liberalism, okay? The next morning, this is Saturday night, the next morning we had a contact. We had one student group at that time at Fordham University. It was our big student libertarian group, one and only. Maybe it was another one somewhere. And the people at Fordham knew the head of YAF, it's New York State YAF at the time, was very friendly at Fordham campus. So Saturday night, Leonard Ludwig gave a little talk on the history of classical liberalism, okay? Sunday morning, the YAF guy would call up my friends at Fordham and say, here's what happened last night. Leonard Ludwig gave a paper, the following people attended it, and they reeled off a list of attendees. He got that from his police spies, he was friendly with the New York City Police Department. So that was the sort of atmosphere. Now, they didn't do anything particularly at the point, but I guess we felt we were on the cutting edge of the revolution. Then we decided the supper clubs were fairly successful, getting 80 people. We did something very daring, and if I turn on retrospect, it'd be pretty crazy. And we issued a call, okay, in a libertarian forum. Come one, come all, first libertarian convention. This was Columbus Day, 1969. Everybody show up for this mammoth thing, okay? We expected we'd get about 200 people. We got about, I don't know, 400 or something like that. Who are these people? Never saw them before. Usually never saw them later either. It's very strange. The whole thing is very strange. Really, this was phantasmagoric because, first of all, we held this thing in a notorious commie hangout, commie hotel in Times Square. The reason why we went there is it was the cheapest hotel we could find. We're not the affluent movement we now are, right? This is the old, this is the old days. So there's a place called the Hotel Diplomat, which has very cheap meeting rooms, etc. So we had these scholarly papers and everything, stuff like that. Then we found peculiar things were happening. Like all of a sudden somebody would we'd stand outside, somebody would pop up with a flashbulb and take our picture. Or somebody would swagger up and say, with a sort of obvious shoulder holster bulge with a crew cut, "Are you one of those anarchists in there?" And we'd say, "Anarchists? Who's that?" Well, I've never heard of it. We're just standing here going to a restaurant. So anyway, that was the situation where it was sort of almost a police bust. They didn't quite get to it, but it was sort of close to it. Also, the people there were we never saw these people. It was a very strange and motley group. Don't forget, we used to have 8 people in the living room with 20 people. And here we find a tremendous spectrum of libertarian variety, ranging from people walking around with capes with dollar signs on them to to people with black armbands, rather weird-looking types with black armbands, and who kept constantly shouting, "Kill, loot." So was not a close meeting of the minds in this convention. It probably turned off more people, set back the movement quite a few years, I think. At any rate, that was where we had to learn through experience and all that. Obviously, it was the essential learning process. So we've now come, I guess, to the early days, 1970. This is 69, a year or two later. I guess I should talk about the first publicity of the movement. What happened is that the fall of 1970. Okay, the campus revolt was taking place in 69 and 70, basically, all the burnings of the buildings, whatever. By the fall of 70, the whole thing had died out very, very fast. Okay. So the New York Times was looking around for something to write about. And they went to the campus. They couldn't find any political activity. They went to Columbia University the year or two before, the heartland of sit-ins and burnings and all that. Couldn't find any political activity at all, except one peculiar group called the Freedom Conspiracy. Who are these people? Never heard of them before. Freedom Conspiracy was the only active political group on campus. It was 1970. They were in favor of Jim Buckley for Senate, a deviation which fortunately has now been corrected. And they're a weird group because on one hand they're talking all this stuff about laissez-faire and free market, and they're also very counterculture types. And things with black flags and so forth and so on, long hair and all the rest of it. So the New York Times felt this was a very interesting phenomenon. They wrote a little article about it. And then 2 or 3 months later, the New York Times Magazine section, which was extremely influential in the media and general opinion groups, wrote a front-page article. This is the early 1971, with a picture of these guys, the two leaders, Stan Lear and Lou Rossetto, with a black flag and whatever, and anarchy written on the back and so forth and so on. And a long lead article on this strange new group called Libertarians, and they're in favor of John Locke and, and so forth and so on. And this is the first time, I think, the modern libertarian movement got any kind of media publicity. And it kicked things off, because then there was op-ed pieces about it, and what happened then was that they asked me to write something about it, and I got an argument with Buckley, as usual, and from that they asked me to write For New Liberty. So the whole thing begins to snowball, and of course about that year, later that year, the Libertarian Party was founded. So I think, since you're all, of course, familiar with the history of the party, you'll hear much more about it from the founding members who were really here in person in Colorado. I'll end my reminiscences and nostalgia at this point, as we've now brought up to the modern current period, and brought you from the antediluvian period of my birth all the way up, all the way up to modern times. So thank you very much.
Somebody want to talk to Murray? Somebody want to show him your bow tie? There's some floor mics in case we have problems hearing you, or in case I can't recognize you. Question here.
Oh, wow. That's something I could spend at least 2 days on. So it's I had met Ein through actually through mutual friends in the early 50s, and those days she was quite different. I mean, she was talking to non-Randians, so there was no Randian movement at the time. So we had mutual friends and so forth, and then when I didn't follow up on this, then when Atlas Shrugged came out, our little group, we all read it and we were all enthusiastic about it, so we wrote her a fan letter and we got reintroduced. This is late 58, yeah. So the Circle of Bastia meets the Randian movement, so like Godzilla meets the Wolfman. It was a very peculiar experience. It was a very traumatic 6 months that I spent on the Randian movement. How can I sum this up? See, the peculiar thing about, first of all, we didn't know about cults in those days, right? There was no Hare Krishna or all that sort of stuff. But the thing is, it was the total disjunction between the external and the internal, the exoteric and esoteric creed. In other words, in religious cults, there's an exoteric creed, which is the creed for the public, the printed writings, which draws people into the movement. There's the esoteric stuff. That's the stuff you get when you're 33rd degree, whatever, right? Here's what we really believe, fellas, okay? And you work your way up to that. Well, it's a very similar thing in the Randian movement. In other words, the exoteric stuff was great. I mean, it's super stuff. Natural rights and liberty and reason and all that, which is why most of us got into it. And then the esoteric creed was quite different, almost contradictory, which created all sorts of fantastic problems, obviously, inner contradictions, tensions. The esoteric creed being essentially Ayn Rand was right on everything, every conceivable topic. So since she changed her mind a lot on concrete issues, like is Mike Wallace a good guy or a bad guy? Right? In other words, the line was handed down. Mike Wallace, great, student of objectivism. 6 weeks later, Mike Wallace is a leper. Okay, so if you weren't clued in, you could get kicked out very easily. So there's that sort of atmosphere, and it's the atmosphere which unfortunately lost, of course, a lot of good people, because either you stay in and get robotized or you leave. So that's the essence of the experience. I mean, that's how I could go on if I could tell anecdotes till the cows come home. I should get on another topic.
I'm going to be real unfair here because I actually don't have a question. I have a quick announcement. That's something that isn't in any of the information. But there will be a short state chairs caucus at the back of the ballroom here if Murray ever decides to finish, which I hope he doesn't.
Oh, wow.
I don't like caucuses.
Where's that Mel? Oh, yeah. What's your...
Even you overlook me. Was there another question? There? A present.
Good heavens. That's very sweet. Fantastic. It's great.
An homage to Murray from the Brazilian Libertarians. And here is their magazine with a picture of Murray, and obviously some of his writings or an article about him in a language that I don't know. Who next? There.
What is the Orthodox Rothbard position on tariffs or on patents and copyright?
The Orthodox position.
Do you want to repeat it?
Yeah. The question is, what is the Orthodox Rothbard position on patents and copyright? The Orthodox position is, this, oddly enough, the same position as Henry George. The only one I can find that had the same viewpoint. Namely, copyright's good, patent's bad. The reason for that is not, as you might think, is that I'm a writer and therefore pro-copyrights. the easy economic determinist argument. It's because a copyright is a common law device which says if you invent something or write something, it doesn't really make any difference. You can copyright an industrial design, for example, right now. What it says is that if you stamp on it, whatever it is, whether it's an invention or a book or whatever, you stamp on a copyright, which means that you're selling it, you're selling the full ownership of it, except you're reserving something. You can chop up property rights in different parts, of course. You're keeping to yourself the exclusive right to sell it, to resell it, or anything identical to it. So that's the copyright, which is perfectly legitimate. The problem with a patent is the government steps in and says, you have the exclusive right to this invention, and nobody else can use it, even if he's invented something 3,000 miles away, completely independently of it. In other words, a patent is a monopoly privilege, repressing people's right to do whatever they want to with their own property. So, and there are, of course, many, in the history of inventions, there are lots of independent inventions. So things are in the air, like 5 or 6 people invented the telephone about the same time. And Bell outraced them to the patent office, which is responsible for for AT&T, because Bell got the exclusive monopoly on any telephone. So this is really illegitimate. So for that reason, in other words, with copyright, you have to prove a guy had access. If somebody has a similar telephone, let's say, you copyright a telephone, somebody else comes up with a telephone 500 miles away, you have to prove the guy had access to your phone. With a patent, you don't have to do that. You have the thing, and that's it. So that's the orthodox line on that.
Murray, when you were talking about the early New York years, you didn't mention the attack on Fort Dix, and I thought you might like to tell that story.
Yeah, that was at this 1969 convention, or whatever you want to call it. This thing was supposed to be very scholarly. We had planned this for a long time. It's going to be the first Libertarian Scholars Conference. Basically, we now have a Libertarian Scholars Conference every year, but that was the first planned one. We had papers and things, panels and all the rest of it. And what happened was that Saturday night, we started, I guess, Friday night. And Saturday night, we had a contingent which said, actually it was Carl Hess who was here this week, said that heck with this intellectual stuff, let's go and attack Fort Dix. There was a movement on to invade Fort Dix, and it's not that I was against the theory of it. I felt it was premature. And also, we had a scholars thing planned, you see, and so, and it wasn't on the agenda. But anyway, so we had a big split. We had a big split in the movement that night, and which I guess about half the people marched on Fort Dix, and the other half stayed with the Scholars Conference. And what happened was that Sunday, the March of Fort Dix occurred. The lady who was the head of the Michigan contingent, who in the whole history of the Libertarian movement, she was probably the wackiest person I've ever met. That's saying a hell of a lot. And her whole contingent came with the black armbands and so forth. And she came stomping back from Fort Dix, marching down the hall, seizing the microphone from a genteel discussion of patents and copyrights, whatever it was, and started cursing us out in no uncertain terms. You SOBs, et cetera, how dare you sit here while we're being gassed in Fort Dix. Of course, they were gassed, obviously, from the, as one might have expected. So I guess that's about it.
Murray?
Yeah.
I'd like to hear the origin of the Rothbardian penchant for bow ties.
Okay, it's very simple. I have to admit that in my early days I was wearing regular plunky ties, and and when I got married, my wife decided I looked much better in bow ties, and that was it. That was the end of the.
Over there?
Yes, Murray, how do you feel that the founding of the Libertarian International is going to affect the future of international libertarianism?
I don't know. There is a Libertarian International being founded. It's meeting like this first time next summer in Interlaken in Switzerland, and well, it should be great. It's hard to know. I'm not really in touch with the European movements, but I just met a few Norwegian libertarians I've never heard of before. Very good people, and there's a whole Icelandic libertarian movement. Apparently, there's a Misesian Austrian professor of economics who've been totally isolated. Imagine how you're isolated in Iceland, right? I mean, you're isolated. New York is one thing, but isolated in Iceland is something else. And have been carrying on the torch for 25 years or so, and then there's now an Icelandic movement. Unfortunately, most of us can't read Icelandic or cut off from this. So the Libertarian International will be an opportunity to meet these people, for one thing, and interchange views and so forth. It should be great. I don't know how many people will show up at the first meeting, but it's, you have to try and find out. The beginning of a liberturn.
Yes.
Another present? Oh, thank you.
Would you like to say something about this present?
Yeah.
This is a present from the people in Park County. And this is Phil Prosser.
How do you do? People of the Park County Libertarian Party have published a free enterprise calendar honoring those people who have made the industrial and political revolution in the last 300 years rather than politicians and generals. And we'd like to present this copy to Murray Rothbard for his pioneering efforts on behalf of libertarianism.
Oh, Murray's getting all these new toys. Who else has a question, a comment, more presents? Over there?
I was just wondering how you would feel about when we finally get elected and get to disband this government as much as we'd like to. Would you favor keeping some of NASA as a defense measure, strictly not to put nuclear weapons in orbit, but as surveillance satellites and an early warning system? Or would you rather see NASA totally disbanded and allow free enterprise to just take over space? And
Free enterprise taking over space all the way. That's an easy one.
That seems like it's the best mic over there.
okay.
I hope I'm not missing somebody over there, but the lights are kind of obscuring my vision, so you might have to speak up. Is there somebody behind that mic?
This mic?
Yeah. Okay.
I understand that Murray is still not related the story of the free market lighthouse at the Columbia Conference in 1971, and I think that is a story that bears repeating.
Yes, let me see. That was the Columbia University one, right? Conference. Yeah, there was a whole thing. I've had a series of jousts with Bill Buckley over the years. Usually what happens is if he thinks we're getting strong at all or getting any publicity, then he attacks me. And then 10 years later, the same sort of thing happened, he attacks me again. So it's the degree of effectiveness is, dependent on the degree of attack. At any rate, one time he said that, these libertarians, they can sit around their busy little seminars worrying about denationalizing lighthouses, whereas we conservatives are out there defending America from the communist hordes. So I answered him that I was more interested in foreign policy than I was in denationalizing lighthouses, actually, strange as it might seem. And of course, I was opposing his view of it. As my friend Ronald Hemingway wrote, he refuses to thank Mr. Buckley for saving his life. So at any rate, at the Columbia University conference, a very sweet gesture, I was presented with a lighthouse as a symbol of so-called impractical, purist libertarianism. I think, as I remember it. Fill me in more on it. So the lighthouse is sort of the symbol.
Murray, you weren't initially a supporter of the LP. What got you to join? What turned you positive on it?
Well, I was against it. Look, what happened, I'll tell you very frankly what happened. You have to remember there was nobody ever heard of the Libertarian Party, right? As far as I knew, there were still only about 8 libertarians in the country. And I suddenly get a call one night from somebody from Colorado saying, we'd like to offer you the nomination for President of the United States. So I figured it's another libertarian nut and hung up. So I just didn't take the idea seriously at all. I thought there were so few people. How can you talk about running for president? And I was wrong. And obviously, the idea caught on. It was extreme. It was a tremendous tactical, strategic success. And so about a year later, I joined the party. I joined the party after my first attendance of the FLP convention, New York LP convention. I was so impressed with the people there. I thought, well, that's it. So I've been here ever since.
He obviously believes in it now since he's accepted the title of Mr. Libertarianism. Jack, were you there?
Yes. Murray, you could probably clear up an area of doctrine that's been bothering me.
Yeah.
I was told at one time, and I don't know if this is apocryphal or not, that you were in favor of the U.S. and Russia negotiating to get rid of nuclear arms.
Yeah, sure.
And then I thought, well, that's nice. The two governments get rid of nuclear arms, but maybe private people will still continue to own them because as libertarians, I don't think we take them away.
Yeah.
And then I was thinking of Leonid Brezhnev with his nuclear arms, and I wasn't feeling very safe, and I thought of Exxon with theirs, and I wasn't feeling very safe, and I wondered what the position really is on this.
There's no canonical position on that yet. It's a tricky area. Within the spectrum of the libertarian movement, as far as I know, there's every view on it. Some friends of mine believe that private nuclear weapons should be illegal because they're per se aggressive. In other words, the very holding of them means you're threatening somebody. Some of the science people believe that every man and woman should have his own laser beam and missile, nuclear missile. I'm sort of middle of the road on that, as I am in almost everything else. My view is that it should be legal, but I would sort of be very wary about anybody who had one and sort of organize a boycott. Don't trade with the guys building a nuclear missile and something like that. But I don't think, as I say, it really needs a lot of discussion. It really does.
Are you in favor of the two governments negotiating for them as governments to take away their nuclear weapons, whether or not other people have them?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The question is that the Reagan administration seems to be paranoid about the Russian threat for invading the United States, and would I comment on the Russians' economic ability to wage war? I don't really think they believe the Russians will invade the United States. I don't think even they believe that. I think what they want to do is to keep American hegemony over all the rest of the world so that what they're worried about is a possible Russian invasion of Western Europe or Persian Gulf or Afghanistan or whatever. It's too bizarre to think they'd actually invade the United States. Their ability was pretty miserable and getting worse all the time. They can't even handle Poland, for heaven's sake. I mean, the communist empire is cracking up. It's one of the great undersold stories of the 20th century. The fact that you had a Russian empire, communist empire, which was monolithic in the days of Stalin, where the Kremlin gave the orders, everybody jumped from New York to China. And we now have a situation where most of the communist parties are split off, or China and Russia are almost at war, where, as a matter of fact, Russia is much more paranoid about China than they are about the United States. They're scared stiff of China. And they can't even keep Poland. Poland is extremely important to them because Poland is the gateway to Eastern Europe, and it's between them and East Germany. And so the fact that they didn't feel they had the guts to invade Poland, I think, shows they're really in bad shape. And the peculiar thing, the ironic part of this whole thing, in the last 40 years, Russia is now in its weakest position, economically, militarily, geographically, whatever. And yet we've revived the whole Cold War nonsense about an imminent Russian threat and the bomb shelters and missiles are coming and all the rest of it.
Somebody hiding behind the lights over there.
Murray, I'd like to ask you what you think is the best book for a comprehensive introduction to Austrian economics.
This is what sort of level? Introductory level?
Something
primer level?
Something appropriate to college study.
That's the trouble. There's no really one book that you can say is a textbook introduction to Austrian economics. There's some good elementary stuff like Beauvais' Essentials of Economics, but it's really much lower level. And there's some very good books, monographs on different topics. Yeah, that's not really a textbook type, though. Textbook type book. Yeah, I would recommend Man, Economy, and State in a pinch.
In other words,
it's difficult. Maybe O'Driscoll's book on Hayek might be a good introduction. Nothing really. Unfortunately, nothing's really hit the. See, the trouble is, there's no incentive to write a college textbook on Austrian economics because nobody would adopt it, or very few colleges would adopt it. And so very few publishers would publish something which only got 3 adoptions, and very few writers would bother doing it. So we have to break through that vicious circle, and which will, I think, happen in time because Austrian economics is growing all the time. Eventually, we get a point where somebody will sit down and write a textbook, and that will be it. But I could recommend things in specific areas. But.
Murray, did you have any involvement with the anti-war and peace movement of the 60s? Did you or any of the people and your friends have any involvement with it?
Yeah, well, I was involved to some extent. I was more in the, let's see, the question is, was I involved in the anti-war movement of the 60s? There was a Free University of New York, which was opened up about that period. First couple of years of which was quite good, very good lecturers, top experts, all anti-war, many of them Marxists, not all. And that was pretty enjoyable. Some of the speakers there and so forth. As far as activism goes, not too much. I did write stuff. I did write inflammatory literature, which caused my biggest success at that point. There were 2 student groups, I think, 2 student libertarian groups in the country. One was at Fordham, which I mentioned already. The other was the University of Kansas. University of Kansas had a YAF chapter, which was libertarian. After reading Libertarian Forum, they all shifted and joined Students for Democratic Society, the whole chapter. It's kind of a shockaroo for them. So that happened. I wasn't really more involved. I knew I got to know a lot of the New Left revisionist historians like Ron Radosh and James Weinstein. But other people were much more involved, and Leonard Liggio was much more active at that point in the actual organizational stuff than I was.
Tony?
I've just been asked if, before I give my question, if you'd make a request to the people in the back of the room to keep it down. We're having a hard time listening.
If they could have heard you, that would have been enough. Would the people in the back of the room try to keep their voices low or move into other areas that aren't going to interfere with the people here hearing Murray? Did you hear me? Thanks. Emmerling is telling me I'm a pushy broad. Okay, Tony, it's all quiet for you.
Murray, I just wondered if you thought that the Gold Commission was going to recommend a return to the gold standard, and if so, would you tell me what you think the price of gold will be?
No, they're not going to recommend a commission, a gold standard. The Gold Commission was mandated by the Congress in the last days of the Carter administration when some writer to some bill, appropriation bill. The president was therefore mandated legally to appoint a commission to investigate return to the gold standard. Reagan finally did it after about 6 months of tremendous pressure. After all, you have to do it, right? It's illegal not to. So he finally appointed one, I think, about June. There are 17 or 18 members of the commission, of which 14 or 15 are dedicated, or maybe slightly less, are dedicated fanatical anti-gold people. Most of them are monetarists. Most of them are either from the Treasury Department or the Federal Reserve Board. There are, however, a couple of very good pro-gold people, Ron Paul, particularly, who's on the Gold Commission, and a Republican of Texas, and Lou Lehrman of Lehrman Institute. So what they're planning to do, I think, is write a minority report. Majority report will be the usual Freemanite baloney, okay? The minority report should be, I hope, scholarly, bang up, historical, theoretical, and political justification for the gold standard, which I hope will get a lot of publicity and influence. So that's basically what's going to happen. The Gold Commission, for example, mandated, the original Gold Commission plan was the report would be in by October, although they only got set up in July and they have only 3 meetings. So I think we got it extended to January, but that's basically it. It'll be just about time enough to write a minority report. What the price of gold would be if we really had a good setup, if we really had a good gold commission, I'm not sure. There'd have to be studied. It'd be something like $1,500 to $2,000 an ounce, something like that. But that would need a lot of work, but around that.
What are your views on abortion and children's rights?
We just passed a very good two platform planks on the topic, which I agree with 100%. I sum up on abortion. I'm 1,000% in favor of everybody's right to own his or her own body, which implies the right of terminating pregnancy. So I'm very much in favor of the right to have an abortion. I'm obviously not pro-abortion in the sense I think everybody should have an abortion. Okay, I don't think there's anybody in that camp. I'm pro-choice, pro-ownership of one's body. On children's rights, I'm in favor of basically the children have the right not to be molested, attacked, mutilated, etc., and have the right to get out. I think that's the key: the right to run away or to contract out with some other foster parent. That I think would solve a lot of the whole problem. But I recommend the two platform planks on that.
Over on this mic.
Yeah, Murray, you mentioned in passing that it appeared to you the Soviet hegemony was breaking up. Right. But some might hold that makes them all the more dangerous and that they're going to have to resort to more drastic measures to defend the Soviet regime. So I'd like to know how you stand on that in the light of an anarchist stand on who ought, how armed forces ought to be organized, and also how you stand on the question of unilateral disarmament.
Well, yeah, I don't understand that the argument. I don't understand the argument that the weaker you are, the more liable you are to attack. I think that's just bonkers. A variant of that, by the way, which is now fortunately dropped out of discussion, is the so-called thirsty bear theory, which was very popular around the spring of this year, winter and spring, which has now unfortunately died out. The thirsty bear theory was that Russia is short of oil, and therefore, since they haven't got much oil, they have to invade the Persian Gulf to get it. There are many things wrong with this theory, namely one, they could buy the oil, they don't have to invade it, they don't invade the Persian Gulf. And secondly, then it turns out the CIA just recently come out with a report saying, shucks, I guess they're not short of oil. They got plenty of oil in Russia. So the thirsty bear theory is now shot. I just don't understand that argument. I think it's bonkers. I don't know of any state in the history of the world which acted on that kind of basis. Now, what was the other parts of your question? Yeah, there was something before that. Russia and something. Yeah, that I think I've answered. Anyway, on disarmament, We've passed the pro-unilateral disarmament plank today. I think it's a very intelligent plank. What it says is we're in favor of unilateral disarmament. Not pending that, not being able to get it, we favor the following thing: joint mutual disarmament, no nuclear strike, first nuclear strike pledge, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a little bit like the taxation plank and that sort of structure. The reason why I haven't been advocating unilateral disarmament fiercely for many years is I'm convinced that we could get joint disarmament very easily. In other words, there's not much point of having unilateral disarmament if you can easily get mutual joint disarmament. It's kind of, you know, so that's the only reason I've not advocated this, thoroughly for a long time. But I think the basic problem is, the bottom line is the nuclear weapons are the big threat to the survival of the human race. I mean, just as simple as all that. It's mass slaughter, and mass slaughter is the big thing which we're supposed to be against. So I think to me, that's the bottom line of the question.
Mark, did you have a question?
Yes. Your reminiscences called to mind George Nash's excellent book, The Conservative Intellectual Tradition in the U.S.
Right.
since 1945,
right,
where he discusses the tripartite composition of the conservative movement as consisting of the libertarian, and anti-communist, and traditional elements. Do you foresee a combination of circumstances arising in the next 10 to 25 years that would result in the reemergence of that libertarian element and the right wing returning to its libertarian heritage?
Well, I'd love to see it, but I don't see it. I don't think it's going to happen. The right wing's gotten worse on most questions. On non-economic questions, it's probably gotten worse since then. Nuclear policy is just as bad. I mean, nuclear war policy is just as bad. Plus, they've got all this terrorism nonsense, which everybody under every bed is a KGB agent. Plus the moral majority, which has shifted a lot of right-wing opinion. I mean, see, in the old days, in the 1950s and 60s, nobody talked about, reestablishing theocracy or outlawing abortion or anything like that, or bringing, the only thing they were worried about was prayer in the public schools, which seems pretty innocuous now, looking back on it. So the whole moral majority thing, I think, has shifted the position to a much more compulsory morality viewpoint than it was in those days. So it looks like it's swinging in the other direction, except on economics, where it's not that great anyway. See, the problem with the right wing in economics is they're not really that interested in it. When I was going to right-wing rallies back in the 50s, I was distressed to find that nobody would ever cheer, there'd be no standing ovation for the free market, right? Or for liberty or something. The only standing ovation was, all power to Chiang Kai-shek. So there was no real, essentially conservatives, except for a few economists who are interested in economics, obviously, essentially they give lip service to the free market. Their hearts are really elsewhere. Their hearts are in compulsory theocracy and nuking the Russians. So, I mean, I'm not ruling it out. Obviously, it's not logically impossible that could happen.
Well, how do you account for the old right's antipathy toward an interventionist foreign policy, and why was there a lack of a theoretical connection between the free market and a non-interventionist foreign policy?
Yeah, there has been. The 19th century classical liberals were totally all-out anti-interventionists. They were not anarchists, by the way. In those days, you didn't have to be an anarchist in order to be against foreign intervention. Richard Cobden, Bright, all these people, all the classical liberals were very anti-foreign intervention. They were so-called Little Englanders. They're very, quote, isolationist, unquote, and very anti-militarists. Thomas Jefferson, for example, is really in favor of disbanding the entire Army and Navy, not just against the draft, against the whole Army and Navy. So, unfortunately, what happened was we lost, as the classical liberal tradition died out, we lost these moorings. We lost the remembrance of them, or the whole tradition. Then the right wing the modern right wing was essentially created by the New Deal, 1930s and 40s, a reaction against the excesses, against the leap into statism of the New Deal. So the right wing was essentially a reactionary movement, in the sense of reacting against this new leap. So it was a coalition of everybody who was against the New Deal, which is a very broad coalition. And most of these people weren't philosophically oriented at all. They weren't really much even free market particularly. So, but they were against the further leap into statism, and they were against then World War II. So you wound up after World War II with a right wing, which was semi-libertarian or isolationist, anti-war, anti-draft, free market. But they didn't have much of a philosophical. They didn't have any theorists much. They didn't have any readings. It was really sort of was a mass movement without a theory. It used to be called the dumb right. It was a sort of expression in those days. There wasn't almost no intellectual content. So what happened was in the middle 1950s, Senator Taft died. Colonel McCormick was the editor of the Chicago Tribune, which those days was an all-out anti-war publication. When these people died out and just retired, it left a power vacuum, an intellectual vacuum, which National Review then could fill very well, because National Review was a brilliantly edited magazine, so it cut through the right wing like a knife through butter.
The third part of my question was, earlier this year when you visited us at the University of Colorado, you said that you were coming out with a new book on the rise of statism in the 19th century. Could you tell us the status of that?
Status is I'm in the middle of it. In other words, this was a book I'm working on the progressive era, the origins of modern statism and the progressive era. What happens to this has happened with all my books. Is they get longer as I get into it. The way I got started in my history book was that I got a small grant to write a 2-volume history of the United States. Somebody came to me and said, Murray, why don't you write a 2-volume history of the United States? Take the usual facts which everybody agrees on, like Lincoln was elected president, something like that, and write the libertarian interpretation of it, right? Should be a lead pipe cinch. Okay, great. Get it done in a year and a half. What happened was, unfortunately, I found out that 2-volume textbooks leave everything out. You can't just take the facts and put a new interpretation on them because the facts are all left out. So I started bringing in the facts. I find tax rebellions in colonial New Jersey. I can't leave that out, right? So things starts getting longer and longer, like Popsy. And I wind up with a 5-volume book on the colonial period. The rest of it dropping out. So, in the progressive era is a fascinating era because I find out that you can't imagine the horrors that went on in the progressive period. Just can't imagine it. And every front, every conceivable front, not just economic and foreign policy, everything. This is the era when psychiatrists take over and try to wreck everybody, doctors, social workers, you name it. They're all in it together. So it got, the topic got bigger. I will, however, I'm in the middle of it. I will, however, finish it. But anyway, that's the status of it. It's not imminent. My next imminent book is my Ethics of Liberty book, which is coming out this fall, Humanities Press, which I'm quite proud of because I think it's sort of like the scholarly counterpart of For New Liberty. It goes into advanced problems like blackmail theory, children's rights, things like that. So I put a little plug for that.
Yes, you've had your hand up for a while.
There's still more questions. It's like that, there's still more questions.
The gentleman asked, do I think there's a conspiracy for one world government, and if so, is the Trilateral Commission part of it? I don't think there's a conspiracy for one world government. There's an establishment that's in favor of international political, economic admixture. The basic objective on the monetary front, for example, they really want is one world bank, like one world reserve system, issuing world paper money so that the whole world can inflate together. And so you wouldn't have to worry about gold or exchange rates. Everybody would be happily inflating together. That's one of the programs of the Trilateral Commission sort of people. I think in general, though, we have to be sophisticated about conspiracy analysis because many conspiracy theorists tend to think there's one group of bad guys sitting somewhere in some room pushing all the buttons, like saying, okay, Russia and China now fight, pretend that you're enemies, and things like that. Well, it doesn't work that way. In other words, what there are is a whole bunch of competing power structures or power-oriented groups trying to get control of a state apparatus and run it. And so you have, say, 4 or 5 or 6 of these groups. Sometimes they're in coalition, sometimes they're fighting each other and whatever. That's I think, the essence of it. And I think looking at it that way, a lot of this stuff is very important. Obviously, the Trilateral Commission was obviously running the Carter administration, for example. So even the establishment media conceded that.
We only have time for about 1 or 2 more questions, and there are a couple of people over at this mic here, so if you go ahead.
Dr. Rothbard, what do you see as the future of the acceptance of the Austrian School of Economics, and when do you expect to win the Nobel Prize for Economics?
The answer to the second question is very easy. Absolutely not. Okay. Austrian, I think the future is very good. The Austrian schools started with Zip in 1940s or whatever. Started really only with Mises and Hayek, and that was about it. It's now grown tremendously since 1971 or 3. It's about this, about coincident with the rise of the Libertarian Party, by the way. And we now have conferences and seminars. We have 2 or 3 universities. We have several, like a FOCOs, I used to call it, of Austrian professors. We still haven't broken through yet. What we have to do is to capture, so to speak, a graduate department. We have to be able to get a graduate school where we can turn out Austrian doctorates. Now, we haven't gotten that yet, but we're getting close to that sort of thing. So I think the future is very bright. See, one of the problems is, one of the reasons for that is that the Keynesian establishment is finished. I mean, they can't solve any of these problems, and they know it. They can't understand why is inflationary recession all the time. Why is it prices keep going up all the time, even though we have recessions? There's no way to explain. The Friedmanites can't explain it either, by the way. Only the Austrians have a solution to that kind of problem. So I think the future is very good. I think this, it's a rapidly growing movement. It's still, I guess, it's the way the Libertarian Party was 6 years ago or something. That sort of parallel.
All right, the last question, same mic.
Thanks, ML. Murray, I've got a little gift to commemorate a special occasion in Toronto a while back, but I wonder if you could just tell the audience whether it's an anarchist principle to enter strange women's bedrooms in the middle of the night.
Of course. Okay, I want to get in a final plug. There's starting at this moment, there's a Center for Libertarian Studies hospitality suite, room 1217 to 18. At that point, the Center for Libertarian Studies is an outfit which I'm intimately associated with. I edit the Journal of Libertarian Studies. They're holding a scholars conference this fall, the 5th or 6th or 8th annual one. And we're kicking off the Ludwig von Mises fellowships, which are fairly munificent postdoctorate or predoctorate graduate fellowships in any discipline discipline related to libertarianism. So anyway, I invite you all to attend room 12, 17, 18. I'll be there myself for a while, so continue this and more informally. Thank you.
Oh, come on, more. For your information, there are probably a couple of other places that Murray's going to be tonight. I don't know what this note from Mary Lou is about, but this is a snack that was given to you. And it says hugs. The Radical Caucus of Libertarian Party has a hospitality suite in room 1745 from now on. And also the Society for Individual Liberty has a cocktail party also at this time in suite 2042. Those 2 room numbers again are 1745 and 2042. And the first place I ever met Murray was at one of those cocktail